How's it going, guys? My name's Evan, and welcome to episode 19 of It Was Suited. We're here at Turning Stone Casino in upstate New York, visiting some friends. Probably gonna hop into my first 2-5 session. I'm pretty nervous, probably gonna play like a nit for a bit, but wish me luck. And with that being said, let's get into it. So we bind for the max, which is 500. First interesting hand comes when we're in the cutoff and look down at ace-queen offsuit. There's been a ton of straddling at this table. Here there's a button straddle to $10. The big blind calls the $10 and it folds back to me. I decide to make it 20 here. I wish I went a little bigger, but the button calls, and before the big blind connect, the dealer puts out the flop. We see an ace-high flop, but this needs to be addressed. The dealer completely forgot about the big blind. He should have acted before he put out the flop. So after talking it through for a bit, we agree that the big blind's going to call the raise for $10 more and we're going to check it down. So that's what we do. We show our hand, and it's good. So things start to get interesting when we look down at pocket nines. I'm in the cutoff here, and I've noticed that players at this table like to call raises with almost any two cards. So when there's a couple limps to me, I decide to raise it pretty big here. I make it 30 to go, and apparently this was not big enough because we end up getting 6 callers. So with $210 already in the pot pre-flop, we see a flop 7 ways that comes King Jack 7 rainbow, not the flop we were looking for. The small blind decides to lead out here for $100. A middle position player calls, and I decide to just make the fold here. Only 2 hands later, we look down at pocket nines again. There's a $10 button straddle and a couple limps to me. I decided to just limp here, and I really wish I raised for the same reason as last hand. I'm gonna get called by worse hands pre-flop. There's a few more limps and the straddle checks his option. So we see a flop 6 ways that comes 7-7-4. It checks to me and I decide to bet $45 here. It folds back to the under the gun player who decides to make the call. So we see a turn card heads up that comes an offsuit jack. He checks it to me and I decide to just check it back here. The river now comes a 3 and he decides to lead out here for $85. He could have any 2 cards here, but when he calls that flop bet for $45, there's a decent chance that he has a 7 here and was slow playing it. He could be bluffing, but I just can't find many hands that would call the flop and decide to lead out on the river here. So I think you could go either way with a fold or a call, but playing a little passive here, I decide to just let it go. With around 400 in my stack, we look down at some cowboys. I'm in middle position, and there's a $10 button straddle. As mentioned before, I'm going to raise it big, so I make it 40 to go, and we end up getting 3 callers. So with $160 in the pot, we see a flop 4 ways that comes 9-9-7. Decent flop for our hand. When it gets checked to me, I'm going to bet here, but no need to go too big, so I make it 50 to go. And one by one, each player folds, and we're going to drag this pot. So over the next hour and a half, we just ran card dead. I could not get anything going, and it was definitely frustrating because I only had about 3 hours to play. So over this time, my stack was just slowly getting shorter, but thankfully, out of nowhere, we look down at pocket aces. So I'm in the hijack, under the gun makes it 25, and under the gun +1 calls it 25. It folds to me, I'm gonna 3-bet this, I make it 85 to go. I feel like with this sizing, I should get at least 1 call from these maniacs. But then something interesting happens. So it folds to the big blind, and he's kind of a short stack, he's got about 260 behind. And after looking at his cards, he decides to go all in. Under the gun and under the gun +1 both make the fold, and obviously we make the call here. He ends up showing pocket queens, so I understand his shove here. So we're heads up all in. The flop comes 9-7-7, turns a 7, and the river's a 9, so we hold, and after running card dead for a bit, we scoop a nice one here. So I'm still trying to stack my chips, and we look down at ace king. There's a $10 button straddle and a couple of calls. I decide to raise it up to 40 here, and we get a call from the big blind and the under the gun player. So we see a flop 3 ways that comes jack high. It checks to me, I decide to just slow down and check it here. The turn comes a 10, and when it checks to me a second time, I decide to bet here for $50, hoping for some folds, but if we do get a call, any ace, king, or queen should give us the best hand here. The big blind folds, but we do see a call from the under the gun player. Hoping for a good river, we do not get it when it comes in offsuit 4. He checks it to me again, and now I'm left in a pretty interesting spot. I think for a bit about bluffing at this, but that river card didn't change much. I don't see him folding if he's calling that turn bet. So after thinking it through for a bit, I decide to just give up and check it back. And I am glad I did, because right after I check it back, he says, ace king's no good. So he had the read on me. He shows a pair of eights, and I don't think he was going anywhere. But let's move on to the next hand. Last hand of the night. We're under the gun here and look down at ace 10 of clubs. I make it 15 to go, and we end up getting 4 callers. So with $75 in the pot, we see a flop 5 ways that comes ace ace 6, so we flop trips. I decide to bet 25 here. I really wish I went bigger, but we end up getting a call from the player to my left and the small blind. So we see a turn card 3 ways that is pretty gross. It comes a third spade. I decide to slow down and check it here. The player to the left of me checks, and now the small blind instantly rips it for about 220. I go pretty deep into the tank here because this player is an absolute maniac. He's been playing a ton of hands. He really could have any 2 cards. So while I'm tanking, I try to get a read on him, and he looks pretty comfortable. He does this weird thing where he looks at his cards, looks back at me, and says, yep, they're still there. And I gotta say, he seemed pretty comfortable saying that. So thinking it over a little longer, I decide to release my hand. The player to the left of me folds, and thankfully he shows queen deuce of spades. So he did turn the flush. We made the right fold. And after this hand, it was time to hit the cage. So we were in for 500, out for 631 for a profit of 131 over about 3 hours of play. Honestly, just got a little lucky at the end there. I'm just really happy to survive my first time at 2-5. Definitely think I'm gonna drop back down to 1-3, but I'm glad to, put myself outside that comfort zone, try some new things, and, book a win. This brings our 19 episode total to 2,305. Can't complain about that. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.